the stories all lie. They tell you about monsters with sharp teeth and tearing claws, about beasts hiding in the shadows of the American frontier. But the real horror wasn't something you could see. It was something you could feel. It was the chilling certainty recorded in the trembling hands of dying men and on the dusty pages of forgotten court records that the endless, empty darkness was watching back. We have a myth about the American West, a story of rugged individuals taming a wild but ultimately lifeless landscape. That's only half the truth. The other half, the darker half, isn't a story of taming the land. It's a story of the land taming us. It's a story of psychological collapse, of minds breaking under a silence so complete it started making its own noise. The letters and journals from pioneers, the court transcripts of unexplained madness, and the folklore that grew like weeds from shallow graves all tell a different story. They talk about a horror that didn't have a name, because it wasn't a creature you could shoot or a threat you could outrun. It was the land itself, a vast, empty, and terrifyingly conscious entity that pressed in on the isolated souls who dared to cross it. They weren't afraid of monsters with claws. They were afraid of the brutal, empty landscape waking up and turning against them. These aren't just ghost stories. This is an exploration of a documented fear that the very ground beneath their feet wasn't just alive, but aware and deeply, unnervingly hostile. And our investigation begins deep underground. The push west ran on gold, silver, and coal, a promise of wealth that had to be pulled from the dark, silent earth. To get it, a generation of men went underground into a world of total blackness, crushing pressure, and an unnatural quiet. And in that quiet, they started to hear things. They called them Tommyknockers, and the legend hitched a ride with expert miners from Cornwall, England. These Cousin Jacks, as they were known, were in high demand in the hard rock mines of California, Nevada, and Pennsylvania during the 19th century. Back home, they had stories of knockers, 2-foot-tall gnome-like creatures with gnarled faces and long white whiskers who lived in the tin mines. When the Cornish miners emigrated, the stories claimed these creatures stowed away in their luggage, following them into the American West. At first, the tales sound almost harmless. The Tommyknockers were mischievous, known for swiping unattended tools or a piece of a miner's lunch, but their defining feature was the sound that gave them their name, a distinct tap, tap, tap coming from inside the rock. Miners working alone for hours by the flicker of a single candle would hear it, a sound that had no business being there, hundreds of feet down. In the folklore, this knocking was communication. Some miners believed it was the Tommyknockers leading them toward a rich vein of silver or gold. A tap-tap might mean dig here, but there was another, much darker interpretation. That same sound, many believed, was a warning of an imminent collapse, the creaking of timbers and the groaning of stressed rock just moments before a tunnel gave way. Men who heard that frantic tapping and scrambled out of a mine would swear their lives were saved by these underground spirits. To show their gratitude, it became an ironclad rule. You always left the last bite of your lunch, the crust of your pasty, as an offering. Failing to do so was inviting their wrath. And an angry Tommyknocker wasn't just a prankster, it was a malevolent force. Tools would disappear for good, lanterns would snuff out at the worst possible moment, and that life-saving knock might not come before the ceiling came down. This is where folklore and documented psychological terror start to blur. Mining has always been an incredibly dangerous job. Cave-ins, poison gas, sudden floods, these were constant threats. The environment itself was an assault on the senses. Absolute darkness, the constant drip of unseen water, the eerie groans of the earth settling. It's enough to unnerve anyone. Rock is always talking, making pops and grates. For a man working in isolation, his mind already frayed by fear and exhaustion. How long before those natural sounds start to feel intentional? How long until the darkness feels like it's hiding something? The journals of 19th century prospectors don't read like fantasy. They read like the field notes of men under siege. They describe a creeping paranoia. A man would be working a seam, completely alone, and feel a sudden shift in the air, the undeniable sensation of not being alone anymore. He'd hear a pebble skitter across the floor in a part of the tunnel he knew was empty. He'd hear that tapping, quiet but persistent, right at the edge of his hearing. Was it the rock settling, or was it a signal? Was it a helpful warning, or a malicious taunt? Not knowing was the real horror. This belief became so ingrained that even pragmatic mine owners had to deal with it. A mine that got a reputation for being haunted by aggressive Tommyknockers could be shut down, not by any official order, but because the miners, hardened men used to daily risk, would simply become too terrified to go inside. They'd rather face unemployment than the anger of whatever was in the dark. The Tommyknocker legend is the perfect embodiment of this psychological horror. It takes a real danger, the instability of a mine, and gives it a face. But it's not the face of a simple monster. It's the face of something that watches, judges, and acts with purpose. The terror wasn't just that the mine could collapse. It was the growing belief that the mine wanted to collapse, that the spirits in the rock were making a conscious choice about who lived and who died. The miners weren't just fighting geology. They were fighting the feeling that they were trespassing in a darkness that was actively, malevolently aware of them. And that feeling wasn't just confined to the depths of the earth. Out on the sun-scorched hills and silent, misty mountains, others were looking up and seeing the watchers stare back. If the horror of the mines was claustrophobic, the terror of the California coast was one of vast agoraphobic emptiness. For centuries, travelers in the Santa Lucia Mountains, the sharp, misty range that slices up from the sea along the Big Sur coast, have reported the exact same unsettling phenomenon. They call them the Dark Watchers. The stories are incredibly consistent, stretching from the first Spanish settlers all the way to today. A person is hiking or riding along a trail, usually around dawn or twilight, when they get that sudden, prickling feeling on the back of their neck. They're being watched. They look up to the crest of a nearby ridge and see a figure silhouetted against the sky. Or maybe several figures. They're always described as unnaturally tall, sometimes 10 feet or more, and completely featureless, just black silhouettes. They often appear to wear a wide-brimmed hat or a long cloak and might be leaning on a staff. They don't move. They just stand there, silently observing the traveler below. And every account agrees on two things. You can never get close to them, and they are not aggressive. If you try to approach a dark watcher, the figure simply vanishes. Sometimes it fades into the landscape. Other times it's just gone. They don't attack. They don't threaten. They just watch. And that right there is the source of the horror. It's the sheer mystery of their presence. They are an unnerving fixture of the landscape, as silent and seemingly as ancient as the rocks they stand on. Spanish colonists in the 1700s named them Los Vigilantes Oscuros, literally the Dark Watchers. Their journals record the unnerving sense of being observed from the hills as they built their missions. But the legend is likely much older, with some attributing it to the native Chumash people. What's certain is that by the time American settlers arrived, the belief in these silent sentinels was deeply woven into the local psyche. This fear was so common, it was even written down by two of California's most famous writers. The poet Robinson Jeffers wrote about them in 1937, describing forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human. They come from behind ridges to watch. A year later, John Steinbeck, who grew up hearing the stories, put them in his short story, Flight. When the young protagonist Pepe flees into the mountains, his mother gives him a chilling warning. When thou comest to the high mountains, if thou seest any of the dark watching men, go not near to them, nor try to speak to them. Later, deep in the desolate landscape, the paranoia grips him. Steinbeck writes, once on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the dark watchers. It was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. That passage perfectly captures the psychological contract settlers felt they had to make. The wilderness wasn't theirs. They were just passing through under the gaze of its silent, unknowable guardians. Survival meant showing the proper respect, minding your own business. Don't challenge the watchers, don't even look too long, and maybe they'll let you pass. Sure, modern science can explain this away as a trick of the light, an optical illusion called a Brocken specter, where your own shadow gets cast on the mist and appears enormous. But while that's plausible, it feels like it misses the point. For hundreds of years, people from different cultures who knew nothing about atmospheric physics saw the exact same thing in the exact same place and came to the exact same conclusion. The hills are watching. The terror of the dark watchers is the terror of being insignificant. It's the feeling of being a small, temporary thing in a vast, ancient landscape that knows you're there but is utterly indifferent to your fate. Unlike the Tommyknockers, they don't offer rewards or punishments. They're just there. A sign that you've crossed into a place where you are no longer at the top of the food chain. You're merely an object of observation. Their silent presence turns a beautiful journey into a paranoid nightmare. The stunning landscape becomes a terrifying panopticon, and the horror isn't that something will jump out and get you. It's the soul-crushing certainty that you are being watched, measured, and dismissed by a power you can never, ever understand. It's a psychological haunting where the ghost is the geography itself. These stories, pulled from folklore and personal accounts, show that the frontier wasn't just a physical place, it was a psychological one that could break a mind with silence and observation alone. If you find these hidden histories as compelling as I do, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. We have more case files to open. Because the pressure of the landscape didn't just create watchers on the outside. Sometimes it woke up something terrible within.